Alright, this is going to be a video on how I installed Cadillac 4-note horns in my truck. I got the grill removed so I could see it better. Depending on what kind of car or truck you might have, that'll be the deciding factor on how you mount them. But just a guideline, you want to have them somewhat close together and all pointing in the same direction so you get the best sound. But you don't want them to be touching, and you don't want them to be touching any nearby object. And if you're going to mount them in the grill behind the radiator, well, if you're going to mount them behind the grill by the radiator, you want to make sure it's in front of the radiator instead of behind it, because if it's behind it, you're going to cook them. Same thing with your wiring. You want to make sure that's all tucked up and out of the way. You got conduit on it. Now, the way I've mounted them on my truck in particular, I took 2 pieces of angle iron, I welded them together to make an S, and I welded that straight to the truck. And I welded some 1/4-inch bolts to the front of it, and I put them on in a way so the horns fit like that. Yeah, they're welded on, so you just put the nut on and you don't have to worry about them spinning. And then this weather flap right here covers the whole thing up. Now, depending on like I said, your application, let's say you got a car. There's room here, but it's behind the radiator, so you're going to toast them. The exhaust is right there. What I see a lot of people do, and you got to jack it up and get under there and get creative on how you're going to make them mount. Might have to do some cutting, a little welding. You can mount it behind the bumper. But if you're going to mount it behind the bumper, or really behind the grill or anything like that, you're going to want to make sure you put dielectric grease on all your connectors. Make sure everything's nice and watertight and protected. Paint any bare metal that you have on any mounts or on the horns, and it'll be set. When I went to do this myself, I've been looking at a lot of other videos on YouTube, and no one really came up with a good video as far as wiring, which I'll go over in a little bit. So, now when I put these in, it's a little hard to see. Oh, there you go. There's all the bolts. What I did, you can see right there, there's a washer, but I also put a washer on the back. You don't want these to be flush mounted up against whatever you're doing. You want to have them just snug, so they can vibrate. If you have them flat mounted straight onto whatever you're bolting it to, these have a tendency to be over tightened. So I have a washer. So here's what it is: I have the mount, the washer, the horn, washer, nut. And you don't want to crank the nuts on too tight. Just get them nice and snug, and use some red Loctite on them so they don't come loose. Now for wiring on the horns, it'll come one of 2 ways. These are all the older style Delco Remy horns. They'll either have a weatherproof connector like this with the 2 wires. You got your colored wires the power and the black's the ground. Or it'll just have a 1/4-inch male spade connector. If that's the case, then that means it's internally grounded through the mount. You don't have to ground the wires out. Now if you ground the wires out, me personally, if I can, I like to link them all together and ground them straight back to the battery, just so you don't have any bare grounds exposed, so they don't corrode and get wet and give you problems down the road. So what I did, you could solder them together, but I just use crimp connectors. It works fine. Put dielectric grease on all the bare connections and use crimp connectors on it. I crimped all the power wires together, and I crimped all the ground wires together. They all come down to a 10-gauge wire for both the power and the ground that runs up. And like I said, you gotta use conduit to prevent chafing and just keep everything protected. Depending on your car, you have to route them differently. But this is how I did. I just ran it across by my other battery cable. It's a little messy over here because I got 2 different wiring harnesses here. I got one for my off-road lights too. But there's my relay. The one for my off-road lights, there was a bolt back there. I was able to just put it right on that. But over here, there wasn't really much I could put it on, so I just used a zip tie and I put it on that hole there. As long as it's not going to vibrate a whole lot and you have a good zip tie, you'll be fine. Now it's a little hard to show you, so I drew up a little bit of a diagram. This is pretty much what your relay is going to look like. I'll hold it right here in case you want to pause it, write it down, or You could look this up on Google too, but you got your battery. That goes to the number 30 post. Your 87 post goes to whatever accessory you got, which in my case is the horns. Somewhere in between there, your battery and your accessory, you're going to want to have a fuse, which just by reading on the forums, people say that these 4-note horns draw 4 to 5 amps each, so I'm running a 20 amp fuse altogether. Usually people put them between the battery and the relay, the fuses, and it doesn't really make too much of a difference. Now, the 85, that just goes straight to ground. Your 86 is your switch, which in our case, instead of using a switch, that's tapped right into the stock horn wires, which I can show you. Now, my factory horns just had regular male 1/4 inch spade connectors, so what I was able to do was just unplug. You're going to want to unplug your stock horns so they don't go off. Tape off the ends, whatever you got to do. What I did on the one end, I took the female connector for it, and I plugged it straight into a male connector, and then that goes straight to my relay. And that's what triggers the relay to make the horns work. So I got my fuse holder here. All these wires and connectors and relays and stuff, you can get right at any auto parts store. It's not rocket science. The wire loom I get at Harbor Freight, really cheap, does its job. You're going to want to put electrical tape on the ends just to keep the wires from coming out. Now my power cables going from the battery to the relay and the relay to the horns are a 10 gauge wire. And then branching off to each horn, I use 14 gauge, which that's plenty. So, like I said, I ran them off the stock horns. Let's say yours has weatherproof connectors like the 4-notes did, and it doesn't have these. What you can do, you just unplug them and tape them off so that way if they don't get corroded if you ever decide to plug them back in. What you do is you just splice a wire into your stock wire. You know, just strip a little bit of it and expose some bare copper and splice a wire into it, and then run a connector off that to your relay. That's about it. Yeah, like I said, just make sure you have them as close as possible to each other, but you don't want them to touch them. You don't want them to touch each other or touch anything around it. And make sure your wires aren't touching anything. And yeah. So, I'll let you guys hear them real quick. If everything's all wired up properly, it should be as simple as this. Well, that's my video for today. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions, let me know.